A trail camera in northern Idaho. Late October, early morning light in a clearing. A black bear is feeding on an elk carcass it has been returning to for days. The bear is relaxed, unhurried, completely at ease. Then something steps out of the tree line on two legs. A dogman. Over 7 feet tall, broad across the shoulders, moving upright with a smooth, bipedal gait in full daylight. The dogman walks directly toward the bear and the carcass, without hesitation, without circling, without slowing down. The bear rises to full height, jaws open, every muscle tensed for a charge. And then the bear breaks. Shoulders drop, head turns. It drops to all fours and moves fast, out of the frame, abandoning its own kill site. The dogman steps to the carcass, crouches, and begins feeding as though nothing happened. The whole thing takes roughly 10 seconds. That is the footage. 10 seconds. And I need you to understand what you just watched, because I do not think the weight of it lands on the first viewing. A 400-pound black bear, one of the most powerful predators on this continent, an animal that will fight wolves and other bears and mountain lions over a food source, just made a survival calculation in real time and decided it could not win. Not against a pack, not against a larger bear, against a single dogman that did nothing more than walk toward it. The bear's threat display, the one that has backed down every challenger it has faced for its entire life, failed. And the dogman did not even react to it, did not flinch, did not slow down, did not acknowledge that the display happened at all. The indifference is what makes this footage different from anything else I have ever covered on this channel. I have shown dogman footage before. Trail camera clips, phone recordings, thermal captures. Every piece of footage I have covered proves the same basic thing, that the dogman exists, that it moves through the same forest we do, that it is large and powerful and real. But this footage does something none of those clips ever did. It does not just prove the dogman exists. It proves where the dogman sits in the food chain, and the answer to that question changes everything, because it sits above the bear. It sits above the animal we have spent our entire lives being told is the apex predator of the North American wilderness, and the bear agreed with that ranking in about 3 seconds. I want you to think about what it takes to make a black bear run from food, not walk away, not huff and circle and eventually leave. Run. In late October, when every calorie matters, when the difference between surviving winter and dying in a den comes down to what a bear eats in the next few weeks. This bear looked at a dogman and decided that keeping those calories was not worth the risk of fighting for them. That is not a minor behavioral observation. That is a data point that rewrites our understanding of predator hierarchies in North America, and nobody in any official capacity is willing to talk about it. I have watched this footage hundreds of times. I have slowed it down frame by frame. I have measured the dogman against reference points in the clearing. I have studied the bear's body language second by second. And the thing that sits with me heaviest is not the dogman. It is the bear. Because the bear knew. Instantly, without contact, without a fight, without testing the dogman's strength. The bear looked at it and knew. 30 million years of evolutionary survival instinct told that bear exactly what it was dealing with, and it made the only rational decision available: leave or die. Whatever the dogman communicated in those seconds, through size, through posture, through scent, through something we cannot detect on a camera, it was enough to override one of the most powerful survival drives in one of the most dangerous animals on this continent. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Thanks. The man who set up that camera is a retired Fish and Wildlife Service field technician with over 30 years of backcountry work across Idaho, Montana, and eastern Washington. He spent his career studying predator-prey dynamics in some of the most remote wilderness in the lower 48. After retirement, he set up a grid of 8 trail cameras on private timberland bordering the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest. It was a personal project. His interest was wolf and elk interaction, the same work he had done professionally for 3 decades, continued on his own time because he could not stop studying the animals he had spent his life with. He ran those cameras across roughly 4 square miles of mixed conifer forest. He checked the SD cards monthly. Over the years, he had captured exactly what you would expect from that kind of terrain. Elk herds moving through seasonal quarters, wolf packs on the hunt, black bears at multiple kill sites across the grid, mountain lion, wolverine once, thousands of hours of footage that built a detailed picture of predator behavior in that specific drainage. He understood animal behavior at a professional level. He was not a hobbyist, guessing at shapes in blurry images. He could identify species, sex, approximate age, and health status from a few seconds of trail camera footage. That is what 30 years of fieldwork gives you. When he pulled the SD card from the camera that captured the confrontation, he did not know what he had. He sat down at his kitchen table with his laptop and started scrolling through the clips the way he always did, scanning for wolf activity, checking bear patterns, noting elk movement. When the footage of the Dogman and the bear played, he stopped scrolling. He watched it again and again. He told me he watched it roughly 50 times over the course of a week before he showed it to anyone. He was not excited. He was not thrilled at a discovery. He was trying to find an explanation that fit inside the framework he had spent his entire career building. He told me that the first time he watched it, his hand started shaking and did not stop for an hour. Not from fear, from the understanding that everything he had believed about the forests he had spent his life working in was incomplete. He checked every alternative. Could it be a person in a costume? The proportions were wrong. The shoulder-to-hip ratio, the leg length relative to the torso, the way the knees articulated during the walk. He had decades of human footage from his cameras for comparison. Hikers and hunters who had triggered his cameras over the years. None of them moved like this. Could it be a bear walking upright? He had 3 decades of bear footage in his personal archive. Bears stand on their hind legs to look around or display. They do not walk with a fluid bipedal stride across a clearing. The gait was wrong. The limb proportions were wrong. The head shape was wrong. He ran through every large mammal in the Idaho inventory. Wolf, moose, mountain lion, elk. Nothing matched. He spent a week trying to make the footage fit a known species and could not do it. He told me something during our second conversation that I have not been able to stop thinking about. He said that the hardest part was not accepting what the footage showed. It was accepting what the footage meant about every other piece of data he had collected over 30 years. Every time he had found a kill site that did not quite match known predator patterns, every time a camera had been knocked down or moved in a way he attributed to bears or weather, every time he had heard something in the backcountry at night that he told himself was an elk or a coyote. He said the footage did not just show him something new. It made him reinterpret everything he had seen before. And that was the part he was not ready for. He sat on it for 3 months. He did not post it online. He did not call a news station. He contacted a researcher connected to the North American Dogman project because he knew from 30 years inside the institutional wildlife management system exactly what would happen if he went public through official channels. Dismissal, ridicule, his professional reputation, even in retirement, destroyed. So he went to people who would take the footage seriously and analyze it without prejudice. I have talked to this man twice. He is not a Dogman enthusiast. He is not selling anything. He is not looking for attention. He is a retired federal wildlife professional who captured something on camera that contradicts everything he was trained to believe. And he is not scared of the creature. He is scared of what admitting its existence means for 30 years of his professional life. Now let me put on the investigator hat and walk through what this footage actually proves when you slow it down and measure it. The camera was a standard commercial trail camera with a fast trigger speed, good resolution, and a wide lens angle. The timestamp puts the footage in early morning, late October, near freezing temperatures. Vegetation movement in the frame indicates light wind from the northwest, which means the Dogman approached from downwind of the bear. The bear did not smell it coming. Whatever triggered the bear's alert response, it was not scent. It was either sound or something else entirely. Something we cannot detect through a camera. The height analysis is straightforward and damning. The camera mount height was known. The tree trunk diameter at that height was known. The elk carcass on the ground provides a secondary reference point. Using those three markers, the Dogman's height can be estimated at 7 feet 2 inches. Give or take 3 inches for camera angle distortion. The shoulder width, measured against the same references, is approximately 32 inches. That is wider than the average NFL offensive lineman. The arm length, measured from shoulder to fingertip using the torso as a proportional reference, extends to roughly mid-thigh. In a human, arms reach to just above the knee. The Dogman's arms are proportionally longer, which is consistent with every credible witness description in the research literature. The gait analysis is where this gets truly strange. The Dogman's walk does not match human bipedal locomotion. The knee flexion is deeper, the hip rotation more pronounced, and the stride length, calculated from ground reference points in the clearing, is roughly 4 feet. A tall human walking casually covers about 2.5 feet per stride. A person deliberately taking long steps might reach 3.5. 4 feet of stride at a casual walking pace requires a leg structure and hip geometry that does not exist in human anatomy. Compare it to a bear's bipedal stance, and the mismatch is even more obvious. Bears standing upright are stiff, uncomfortable, using a posture their skeleton was not designed for. The Dogman moves upright with the ease of something that was built for it. Compare it to great ape locomotion, and there is still no match. The movement pattern is unique. It belongs to nothing in the known biological record. The audio captured by the camera adds another layer. The bear does not vocalize during the confrontation. No huffing, no jaw popping, no growl. Bears almost always vocalize during threat displays. The absence of vocalization suggests the bear was too startled or too frightened to produce sound, which is itself extraordinary. A bear that is scared silent is a bear that has encountered something far outside its normal threat matrix. The Dogman also does not vocalize audibly. Some researchers, including investigators with the North American Dogman Project, theorize that Dogman may use infrasound frequencies below the range of human hearing and below the pickup capability of most trail camera microphones to communicate threats. If the Dogman produced an infrasound vocalization during its approach, it would explain both the bear's sudden alert and the bear's rapid decision to flee without physical contact. The camera cannot confirm this, but the bear's behavior is consistent with an animal that received a threat signal we cannot hear. That is what makes this case fundamentally different from every other piece of Dogman evidence I have covered. It is not just a sighting, it is a measurable interaction between a Dogman and a known species, captured in daylight, on camera, with behavioral data that can be analyzed and compared against decades of documented bear behavior, and every comparison leads to the same conclusion. I need to say something about the daylight factor, specifically, because I think people in this community have become so accustomed to grainy, blurry nighttime footage that they have forgotten what clear evidence actually looks like. Almost every piece of trail camera footage involving a dogman that has ever surfaced was captured at night, in infrared or thermal, in conditions that make definitive identification nearly impossible. Skeptics dismiss those clips for the same reason every time. Low resolution, poor contrast, could be a person, could be a bear on its hind legs, could be a shadow artifact. Those dismissals are sometimes valid and sometimes lazy, but they exist because the footage quality allows for doubt. This footage does not allow for doubt. It was captured in natural morning light with a camera designed to produce clear, high-resolution wildlife images. The dogman is not a blurry shape. It is not a silhouette against a dark tree line. It is a fully visible, clearly defined figure walking across an open clearing in daylight. You can see the fur. You can see the head shape. You can see the way the limbs move. There is nothing ambiguous about it, and the fact that it was captured during a behavioral interaction with a known species gives it a context that standalone sighting footage never has. We are not just seeing a dogman, we are seeing what a dogman does to the world around it. Let me put this in context, because I think a lot of people do not fully appreciate what it means for a black bear to lose a confrontation at a kill site. An adult male black bear weighs between 250 and 600 pounds, depending on the region and the time of year. A bear in late October in northern Idaho, fattening for hibernation, is at the upper end of that range. These animals are powerful enough to flip 300-pound rocks with one paw while foraging for grubs. Their bite force exceeds 800 pounds per square inch. They can kill an adult moose. They can outrun a horse over short distances. In their range, they sit second only to grizzly bears in the predator hierarchy, and in areas where grizzlies are absent, they sit at the absolute top. A black bear defending a food source is one of the most dangerous wildlife scenarios in North America. More people are injured by bears defending food than by almost any other predator behavior. This is not a timid animal. This is not a creature that startles easily or backs down from confrontation when calories are on the line. Calories in late October are survival. A bear that loses a food source before hibernation may not survive the winter. The biological imperative to defend that kill is enormous. So what displaces a bear? In the established hierarchy, the list is short. A larger bear, a grizzly, in historical range, overlap a tiger. Wolves can harass a bear off a kill, but only in coordinated packs, numbering 5 or more. And even then it takes sustained effort over minutes, sometimes hours. A single wolf cannot displace a bear. A mountain lion cannot displace a bear. A mountain lion will not even try. There is nothing in the documented scientific record where a single animal of any species displaces an adult black bear from a kill site with nothing more than a direct approach and a casual walk. Except, apparently, a dogman, and it did it without physical contact. No fight, no biting, no wrestling, no bluff charge of its own. The bear assessed the dogman during those 11 seconds and made an instantaneous biological calculation that fighting was not worth the risk. That calculation is not conscious. It is not reasoned. It is the product of 30 million years of evolutionary programming that has kept bears alive through ice ages and extinction events and every predator the North American continent has ever produced. When that programming tells a bear to run, it is because the bear's body, at the deepest level of its survival architecture, has determined that the thing in front of it will kill it if it stays. I personally think this is the single most important piece of dogman evidence I have ever covered on this channel. Not because it shows a dogman, We have footage of that, but because it shows what a dogman does to the established food chain, it does not exist alongside bears and wolves. It sits above them, and a black bear with 30 million years of evolutionary survival instinct agreed with that assessment in about 3 seconds. This footage is not an isolated data point. The pattern of dogman dominance over known apex predators shows up across the research literature if you know where to look. Databases maintained by the BFRO and adjacent research organizations contain multiple reports from the Pacific Northwest and Great Lakes region of hunters finding bear carcasses with injuries that do not match any known predator, and no feeding. The bears were killed and left where they fell. Whatever killed them did not eat them. That is not predation. That is territorial enforcement. Something killed those bears to send a message, and the message was not hunger. The message was dominance. One account from northern Idaho, less than 100 miles from where this trail camera footage was captured, describes a hunter who found an adult black bear dead at the base of a ravine in the fall of 2019. The bear's neck was broken, and its skull showed compression fractures consistent with extreme blunt force. There were no bite marks anywhere on the body, no claw marks, no scavenging. The bear had been killed by something that hit it with enough force to shatter bone, and then whatever killed it walked away without eating a single bite. The hunter reported it to Idaho Fish and Game. They told him it was probably killed by a fall. The bear was found on flat ground at the base of the ravine, not on the rocks. There was nowhere for it to have fallen from. The hunter filed his report and never heard back. Another account from the Boundary Waters region of Minnesota describes a pair of canoe guides who found 2 black bears dead within 50 yards of each other on the same portage trail in the summer of 2014. Both bears showed the same injury pattern: crushed rib cages, spinal damage, no feeding, no scavenging. 2 adult bears killed in the same location by something powerful enough to break their bodies open and disciplined enough not to eat them afterward. The guides reported it to the Forest Service. The official explanation was injury-specific aggression, bears fighting each other, but bears that fight each other leave bite marks and claw wounds. These bears had neither, and both were killed, not just one. Whatever did this killed 2 apex predators in the same area within the same time frame, and it did it without using its teeth. In northern Wisconsin and Michigan's Upper Peninsula, wildlife managers have documented entire wolf packs abandoning established territory, seemingly overnight. Packs that had held the same range for years, that had denned in the same locations across multiple breeding seasons, suddenly vacated. The DNR attributed the shifts to disease pressure or human disturbance, but in at least 2 documented cases, clusters of dogman sightings occurred in the exact same area during the exact same time frame the wolves left. The wolves did not die. They did not disperse gradually the way packs do when territory pressure increases. They left. All at once, the way animals leave when something moves in that they cannot compete with. One case in particular stands out: a pack of 9 wolves that had been GPS collared by a university research team in the Upper Peninsula abandoned a territory they had held for 4 consecutive years in the span of a single week in 2017. The tracking data showed the pack moving east in a tight group at sustained speed, covering 30 miles in 2 days, and establishing a new territory in an area already occupied by another pack. Wolves do not voluntarily enter occupied territory. The risk of conflict is too high. Whatever they were leaving behind was more dangerous than walking into a territorial fight with another pack. The pattern repeats with mountain lions. In corridors where dogman sightings are frequent and sustained, cougar activity drops, not gradually over months or years. It drops sharply and does not return. Cougars are intensely territorial. They do not abandon established range easily. A female cougar with kittens will fight nearly anything to hold her territory. Yet, in certain drainages across the northern Rockies and the Pacific Northwest, cougar sign vanishes over the span of weeks and does not come back for years. Trail camera surveys that had reliably captured cougar activity for seasons suddenly go blank. Track surveys that had documented consistent cougar presence return nothing. Something is pushing them out, something that sits above them in the hierarchy, convincingly enough that a mother cougar decides her kittens are safer somewhere else. Domestic animals show the same recognition. Dogs refusing to go outside after dark. Horses breaking through fencing to flee a pasture they have grazed peacefully for years. Livestock clustering in the center of fields rather than grazing at the edges near the tree line. These are animals with millions of years of predator recognition hardwired into their biology. They know the difference between a coyote and a wolf. They know the difference between a bear and a mountain lion, and they are reacting to something they identify as a threat category above all of those. One rancher in central Idaho, roughly 60 miles south of where this trail camera footage was captured, reported that his cattle refused to enter a particular section of pasture for 3 consecutive weeks. In the fall of 2021, he had grazed that section without issue for over a decade. The cattle would walk to the fence line, stop, and turn around. His dogs, 2 experienced livestock guardian dogs that had faced down coyotes and black bears without hesitation, would not cross the fence line either. They stood at the boundary and barked into the tree line every night for 2 weeks until their voices went hoarse. He never saw what was in the trees, but he found tracks on the far side of the pasture that he could not identify. Bipedal impressions, too large for a human, pressed deep into ground that was frozen hard enough that his own boot barely left a mark. He stopped grazing that section and has not used it since. Jody Cook and the North American Dogman Project have documented this pattern across hundreds of reports from multiple states. When a dogman moves into an area, the existing predator population either leaves or dies. It is not coexistence. It is displacement. A lot of you asked after my last video whether dogman and bears could coexist in the same forest. This footage answers that question. They can occupy the same forest, but only because the bear knows its place. And if the bear forgets, the dogman reminds it. In about 10 seconds, Western science is just now capturing on camera what indigenous peoples across North America documented through centuries of direct observation. The Ojibwe and Anishinaabe peoples of the Great Lakes region describe beings they called the Mishi-Pishu, great wolf-like creatures that were dominant over all other forest animals. Not coexisting with them, dominant over them. The oral record specifically describes other animals fleeing areas where these beings were active. Ojibwe hunters were taught that if the forest went quiet, if the birds stopped calling and the deer stopped moving and the bears stopped foraging, it meant one of these beings was near. The absence of other predators was itself the warning sign. That behavioral description matches the ecological pattern that researchers are documenting around dogman activity today with almost eerie precision. The Nez Perce tradition is particularly relevant here because the footage was captured in Idaho, which is traditional Nez Perce territory. The Nez Perce described a creature that walked like a man, but hunted like a wolf, a being that occupied the highest position in the forest hierarchy. The Nez Perce were extraordinary wildlife observers. They coexisted with grizzly bears, gray wolves, mountain lions, and wolverines for thousands of years. They understood predator behavior at a level that Western science did not reach until the 20th century, when the Nez Perce identified something as sitting above grizzlies and wolves in the hierarchy. That assessment carried the weight of millennia of accumulated observational data. They were not guessing. They were reporting. The The Shawnee oral tradition describes shape-shifting wolf beings that other predators actively avoided, not feared in the way prey fears a predator, but avoided in the way a subordinate predator avoids a dominant one. The Shawnee identified a very specific behavioral dynamic, a hierarchy within predators rather than between predator and prey, and they described it with a specificity that reads like a modern wildlife management report. That dynamic is exactly what the trail camera captured. The bear did not flee the dogman the way a deer flees a bear. It fled the way a coyote leaves a kill site when a wolf arrives. Subordinate predator recognizing dominant predator, yielding without contact. The Blackfeet of the northern Rockies described night wolves that walked upright and dominated grizzly bears. The Blackfeet had intimate knowledge of grizzly behavior. They hunted them. They lived alongside them for generations. They respected grizzlies as the most dangerous animal in their world. When the Blackfeet said something dominated a grizzly, they were not telling campfire stories for entertainment. They were transmitting survival critical information from one generation to the next. The Blackfeet described these night wolves as territorial enforcers, beings that claimed specific valleys and drainages and drove out anything that did not belong. The behavioral detail in these accounts is striking because it matches the ecological displacement pattern researchers are documenting today in areas of sustained dogman activity. The Blackfeet were watching the same phenomenon we're seeing in Wolfpack, GPS, data, and cougar population surveys. They just saw it first, and they saw it for a lot longer than we have. Every indigenous culture that lived in dogman territory reached the same conclusion independently. This creature sits at the top, not alongside bears, not competing with wolves, at the top. And now we have trail camera footage in clear daylight that confirms what they documented for centuries. I personally think the question is not whether we should believe indigenous knowledge about Dogman. The question is why it took us this long to listen. After the footage was shared, a small team of researchers visited the kill site with the camera owner's permission and guidance. What they found extends the story far beyond those 11 seconds of footage. The elk carcass itself told a story that contradicted everything we know about bear feeding behavior. Bears are messy eaters. They tear at a carcass, scatter remains, crack bones open for marrow, and toss them in random directions. A bear kill site, after a few days of feeding, looks like a bomb went off. Fur scattered in a wide radius. Bone fragments spread across the ground. Stomach contents dragged through the dirt. The carcass at this site showed none of that. It showed signs of systematic processing. Specific muscle groups had been removed cleanly, separated from the bone with a precision that does not match any known predator's feeding mechanics. The hindquarters had been stripped in sections. The cuts following the natural separation points of the musculature, as if whatever was feeding understood the anatomy of the elk and used that understanding to take the meat apart efficiently. The bones showed scoring marks consistent with something gripping and pulling rather than biting and tearing. If you watch my video on the Pacific Northwest kill site investigation, this pattern will sound familiar because it's the same thing the researchers found at the Dale footage site. Deliberate, organized, intentional. There was another detail at the carcass that the researchers almost missed. The elk's antlers had been removed, not broken off the way they would be if the skull had been crushed by a bear or cracked open for brain matter. The antlers had been twisted and pulled free from the pedicles with what appeared to be sustained rotational force. That requires hands. That requires grip strength beyond anything a bear or wolf possesses. And it requires a reason to remove them. Antlers have no caloric value. No predator in the known record removes antlers from a kill. The researchers could not determine why the antlers had been taken. They only knew they were gone, and the removal marks were consistent with manual extraction by something with opposable grip. The physical evidence around the carcass was equally significant. The researchers found tracks, not bear tracks, bipedal impressions pressed into the soft ground near the carcass, 16 to 18 inches in length, showing a toe pad structure inconsistent with any known North American animal. The stride length between impressions indicated something walking at a casual pace, with a step of roughly 4 feet, matching the gait analysis from the footage. Tree damage in the immediate area told its own story. Bark stripped from trunks at 6 to 7 feet of height. Branches broken in a directional pattern, consistent with something large moving through the understory at head height. Not wind damage, not elk rub. A clear path between the kill site and a dense thicket approximately 200 yards to the north. The thicket itself showed signs of repeated use over an extended period, flattened vegetation in a depression large enough for something well over 6 feet to lie down in, the ground compressed in a way that suggested sustained weight over multiple visits. Hair samples were collected from bark at the edge of the depression, but they were never officially tested. No lab would accept them without a species identification to test against, and no researcher involved was willing to submit them under their own name. The samples remain in a private collection, unanalyzed, waiting for the day when institutional science decides to take this seriously. The footage showed us 11 seconds. The kill site showed us weeks of activity. This was not a one-time visit. The Dogman had been using this area as a hunting ground, and the bear had been feeding on what the Dogman left behind, picking up scraps from a higher predator's table. When the Dogman showed up and the bear was still there, it was not a random encounter. It was a correction. The bear had overstayed its welcome. If we accept this footage as genuine, and I do, it requires a fundamental rethinking of how we understand wilderness ecosystems across North America. We have built our entire wildlife management framework around the assumption that bears, wolves, and mountain lions are the apex predators. Every conservation plan, every habitat corridor assessment, every hunting regulation, every endangered species recovery program is built on that assumption. What happens to those frameworks when there is something above them? What happens to a wolf reintroduction program when the wolves are being displaced by a predator that does not officially exist? What happens to bear population models when bears in certain corridors are abandoning territory for reasons the models cannot account for? Think about what this means practically. A state agency allocates millions of dollars to wolf recovery in a specific region. They track pack numbers, denning sites, prey availability. They build population models and set management targets. And then a pack abandons its territory overnight, and nobody can explain why. The model says disease. The model says human disturbance, but the tracking data shows a healthy pack moving at speed away from a territory with abundant prey and no human pressure. The model does not have a variable for an unclassified apex predator, because acknowledging that variable would require acknowledging the predator. So the data gets explained away and the model stays intact, and the next pack that abandons territory gets the same explanation, and the pattern continues because nobody is allowed to see the pattern. The DNR and Fish and Wildlife Service cannot acknowledge Dogman without dismantling decades of management policy. It would require reclassifying entire ecosystems. It would require rebuilding predator population models from scratch. It would require acknowledging that their existing data contains patterns they chose not to investigate because the investigation would lead somewhere institutionally unacceptable. And it would require admitting that hundreds of witness reports they dismissed as misidentification or hoax were credible accounts of a real animal all along. This is not conspiracy thinking. This is institutional inertia. It is easier to ignore evidence that breaks your model than to rebuild a model that took decades to construct. And so the evidence gets filed under unidentified, and the models stay the same. And the gaps in the data get explained away with theories that satisfy the framework, even when they do not satisfy the evidence. I am not asking the DNR to hold a press conference about Dogman. I am asking them to explain why entire wolf packs abandon territory overnight. I am asking them to explain why bear populations in certain corridors crash without disease or hunting pressure to account for it. I am asking them to explain what made a 400-pound black bear run from a kill site like it had encountered something it could not fight. They have the data. They just do not have a framework that allows them to interpret it honestly. And this has real consequences for real people. Every year, millions of hikers, hunters, and campers walk into backcountry forests across Idaho, Montana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and the Pacific Northwest, carrying bear spray and bear bells, and following bear safety protocols, because they have been told that the black bear is the apex predator in those forests. They hang their food from trees. They make noise on the trail. They know what to do if they encounter a bear, but nobody tells them what to do if they encounter something that a bear runs from. Nobody warns them that the predator hierarchy they were taught in every outdoor safety course may be missing its top entry. Every bear safety pamphlet, every national forest trailhead sign, every ranger briefing operates on the assumption that the bear is the biggest threat in the woods. This footage suggests that assumption is wrong. And if it is wrong, then every person who walks into those forests deserves to know what the actual hierarchy looks like, even if that knowledge is uncomfortable. Even if it contradicts the official position. There is one more piece of this story, and it is the piece that sits with me the heaviest. After the footage was analyzed and shared with the research team, the camera owner went back to the site. He wanted to check his remaining cameras and swap out the SD cards the way he always did. The camera that captured the footage was still mounted on its tree. The SD card was still in the slot, but the camera had been rotated on its mount, turned to face the tree trunk instead of the clearing, not knocked loose by wind or weather, deliberately turned. The mount screws were finger tight, loosened just enough to allow the housing to be rotated and then left in its new position. Something with hands had turned that camera to face a tree. He checked his other 7 cameras across the 4-square-mile grid. 2 were missing entirely. The mounting straps had been cut, not torn, not chewed, not weathered apart. Cut, clean edges. 3 more cameras were still mounted in their original positions, but the SD cards had been removed from inside the housings. The cameras were left in place. The cards were gone. The remaining 2 cameras were untouched, but they had captured nothing unusual on their cards. 8 cameras across 4 square miles. The ones that might have captured useful footage were disabled or stripped. The ones that had captured nothing were left alone. That is not random animal interference. That is selective, targeted removal of surveillance equipment by something that understood what the cameras were, what the SD cards contained, and which units posed a threat. He pulled his entire camera grid that day. Every camera, every mount, every strap. He loaded them into his truck and drove home. And he has not set up cameras on that property since. He still hikes the area. He still watches for wildlife. He still loves that piece of forest the way only someone who has spent 30 years in the backcountry can love a piece of land. But he no longer tries to document what lives there. He told me something, the second time we spoke, that I keep coming back to. He said that for 30 years, he had walked through those forests believing he understood who lived there. He knew the wolves, he knew the bears, he knew the lions and the elk and the coyotes. He had built a map of that ecosystem in his mind, species by species, territory by territory, and in 11 seconds of trail camera footage, he realized the map was missing the most important thing on it. He said he does not feel less safe in the woods now. He feels less certain. And for a man who spent his life building certainty out of data, that is a harder thing to carry than fear. This is the part that stays with me, not the footage, not the bear, not even the size of the tracks, or the width of the scoring marks on the bones. It is the fact that the Dogman found 8 cameras spread across 4 square miles of dense forest, determined which ones had captured footage worth removing, and selectively disabled them. That is not animal behavior. That is counter-surveillance. And it was executed by something that had just casually displaced a 400-pound black bear from its own kill site the way you would shoo a raccoon off your porch. I covered intelligence in Dogman behavior in my video on the Pacific Northwest investigation, and I thought that case was the ceiling. The bone stacking, the deliberate processing, the trail camera manipulation at that site. I thought that was as far as the evidence went. I was wrong. This case goes further. This is not a predator operating on instinct. This is something that understands human technology, evaluates it, and neutralizes it with a specificity that should make every researcher in this field deeply uncomfortable. If you have ever seen something in the woods that you could not explain, something that made the hair on your neck stand up and every instinct in your body tell you to leave, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments or reach out to me directly, because the more accounts we collect, the clearer the picture gets. And I think the picture is getting very clear. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. I have more coming, and what I am working on next builds directly on the pattern we uncovered here. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.